you're supposed to have a narrative that says, well, I did this so I could do that, so I could do the other thing. And it was all perfectly planned and linear. And I like to tell people about how one door led to another in completely unpredictable ways, such that I really stumbled on whatever level of success I've been fortunate to have. Because I think it's important to know that there's really no point in your life, in my view, that you really have to have it all figured out. I'd be lying if I said I did right now.
That's such an important point, and I wanted to just emphasize that, especially for our audience. A lot of folks who are kind of figuring out whether it's as a young man, kind of what to do with their career, or maybe they're mid-career and they're thinking about transitioning. I think it's very easy to point to people who are successful and be like, "Oh, they had it all figured out," or had a life plan. I don't know. Maybe some people who like wanted to be a doctor from the age of 5, but I think most of the people that I know, certainly, especially in the business world, I think even if they had an inkling of entrepreneurship, that don't think they could have predicted their careers in a lot of ways. And as you said, it's really kind of finding one, almost like changing one interest to the next, and it leads to learnings and logical conclusions. So it's kind of interesting because we were talking about sort of the almost impractical liberal arts degree, and then now you decide to go to a professional school, which is very practical, Columbia Business School, in terms of training operators and entrepreneurs. What was that experience like for you?
I didn't really know anything about a business education. So
Hmm.
I was among the fortunate few who genuinely benefited from the education. There were folks who had gone to business school for undergrad, or, who had worked in an investment bank for a couple of years, and it was sort of the expected path. Speaking of folks
Sure.
who have it all figured out. For me, I truly learned something, and I found something that was a vestigial interest of mine, but that I became reintroduced to and quite interested in, which was that it was in 2002, folks were studying. That's when I went to business school. Folks were studying corporate finance, and
Right.
I got very interested in decision optimization. And there was a set of courses around statistical modeling, and how to make ideal decisions in the presence of uncertainty that drew my attention and led me back to an area of interest. I referenced earlier that I had intended to be a math or science major at a
Hmm.
certain point, and so it felt like a little bit like coming home to get back into a world of numbers. And by the way, one thing I'd love to pick up on when you referenced this notion of having a plan versus
Hmm.
one step leading to the next in a sort of opportunistic way. You know, you always have the possibility of imposing a narrative ex post facto on what happened to
Sure.
you. So if I walk into a job interview, I'm surely not telling my story as well. This happened, so this other thing happened, and that would also be an overstatement of how lax it might have been. But the point is, you can put a narrative on it, and then when you add on top of that, that the world has become so much more forgiving of people who take a year off or who go travel or pursue their passion. It's really nothing. I tell people it's nothing to stress over anymore if you don't know exactly where you're headed.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes if you do know exactly where you're headed and you're rigidly inflexible about it, it may actually preclude interesting opportunities from, rising. Because the reality is, like the world, even education, the marketplace has shifted so much that some of the most successful people I know have, in fact, sort of been very astutely aware of kind of changes in the world and adapted their careers accordingly. I think marketing is a really great example in terms of it's become much more quantitative, just given the tools and online formats. So in a lot of ways, people with your background or training, or at least interests, it's catered to them in a different way than the old ad agency type of marketing model.
Yeah.